Hi, Hope Community Church. Hope you're doing well. As you know, we've started a new reading in the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah is one of my favorite New Old Testament books, and the reason it is because it's a great book that teaches about leadership, and using Nehemiah as a tool to teach us how important leadership really is to accomplish what God wants us to do. We see it so clearly in chapter 4. We also know that Nehemiah has been given the task to rebuild the walls around Jerusalem. We see that there's a couple people who are kind of like a thorn in the side of the Israelites as they're trying to accomplish this. And in fact, they're discouraging them in a lot of ways. We see it in chapter 2. We'll see it here in chapter 4. You'll see it again in chapter 6. And that's one of the things about discouragement, that it's not only universal, in other words, everyone goes through it, but it's also reoccurring. It would be nice that we would get discouraged just one time in our lifetime, we deal with it and move on, but no, we know that's not the case. Discouragement sometimes can come in waves. Sometimes it comes on, it rushes into our lives and causes a lot of problems, but we just know that discouragement is part of our life. So Nehemiah is going to help the people of Israel deal with the discouragement that comes their way as they're trying to accomplish this task. So let's look in chapter 4. It says here, when Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and was greatly incensed. He ridiculed the Jews, and in the presence of his associates and in the army of Samaria, he said, "What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore their wall? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they finish in a day? Can they bring the stones back to life from those heaps of rubble, burned as they are?" And then Tobiah the Ammonite, who was at his side, said, "What they are building, that even if a fox climbed on it, it would break down the wall of stones." And then Nehemiah prays, which is one of the great things a leader does in the midst of discouragement and trouble. He prays. He says, "Hear us, O our God, for we are despised. Turn their insults back on their own heads. Give them over as a plunder in the land of captivity. Do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sins from your sight, for they have thrown insults in the face of the builders." And it says here, "So we rebuilt the wall till all of it reached half its height, for the people worked with all their heart." So here we understand that the people are halfway done with the rebuilding of the wall. And it says here, "But when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabs and the Ammonites and the men of Ashdod heard that the repairs to Jerusalem's walls had gone ahead and that the gaps were being closed, that wall was coming together, that they were very angry. They all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and to stir up trouble against it. But we prayed to our God and posted a guard day and night to meet this threat." And that's really kind of what Nehemiah does here. Nehemiah kind of has a plan B and has a plan to kind of thwart what was happening. Verse 10, though, it says, "Meanwhile, the people in Judah said, 'The strength of the laborer is giving out.'" In other words, they're getting tired. "And there's so much rubble that we cannot even rebuild the wall." Let me stop there for a moment and just explain to you what discouragement does. The very word discouragement means to take away one's courage. And we all know also that when we're discouraged, it affects us physically. That sometimes it can really tire us out. And that we see that here with the people. It says that their strength of the laborers is giving out. They're getting tired. That discouragement is wearing them down. It's weighing them down. But it also says that all they could see was the rubble around the wall. In other words, discouragement tends to make us see the things that aren't accomplished, not that which has already been accomplished. Discouragement helps us to see the negative and not the positive. And obviously the Israelites were being discouraged because they only could see that the stones that were not laid yet, that were still laying around. And it says, and then they said they couldn't even rebuild the wall. And they said, "There's just no way we can do that." That's discouragement. That's taking away our courage. And that's what our enemy wants to always do. In fact, it says in verse 11, "Also our enemies said, Before they know it or see us, we will be right there among them and will kill them and put an end to the work. And then in verse 12, then the Jews who lived near them came and told us 10 times, wherever you turn, they will attack us. So there's a lot of discouragement here, a lot of nasty things that are being said. But look what it says in verse 13. Nehemiah says, therefore, I stationed some of the people behind the lowest points of the wall at the exposed places, posting them by families with their swords, spears, and bows. Nehemiah, what a leader. Someone who is taking the bull by the horns in a sense, and is not allowing this discouragement to take hold. He says in verse 14, after I looked things over, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, and this is Nehemiah, don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. It's almost like a halftime speech. You go in at halftime, you're kind of getting beaten up. Nehemiah comes along, has this incredible speech, says, remember who God is. Remember how faithful he is. Remember all the times where he was there for you. He never leaves you. He never forsakes you. He's always there. And then look what it says in verse 15. And when our enemies heard that, we were aware of their plot, and that God had what? Discouraged them. It said that God had frustrated it, and that we all returned to the wall. See, folks, it's easy for us to hear those voices who are discouraging, those voices who are negative, the voices of the world. When we tend to listen to those things, it's easy for us to get discouraged. It's easy for us to lose our strength. But when we listen to God's voice, what happens? He frustrates their plans. He discourages those who are trying to discourage us. God turns it around when we put our faith and trust in him and listen to his voice. We are able to do abundantly more than we can ever ask or think, and God delights in doing it in our lives. This is one of these chapters that teaches us that very clearly. In fact, when you read the rest of chapter 4, you begin to see Nehemiah continues to lead by being using strategy to keep the Israelites from being discouraged. And we see in chapter 5, I believe, or chapter 6, I don't remember which one, where they were able to finish the building of the wall. But again, I want to remind you that in chapter 6, Sanballat and Tobiah are right there again, trying to discourage the people of Israel, trying to discourage them. So even as we read through this book and we see the victory here in chapter 4 that the people of Israel have been able to accomplish by listening and hearing God's voice and remembering who God is, we always have to remember that discouragement is lingering somewhere. And we have to learn to deal with discouragement Nehemiah's way. And that is always remembering how God is faithful. I encourage you, as husbands and wives, as family members, brothers, sisters, whoever you are, that if you're being discouraged, just remember those times that God has done great things in your life. That's how we get through discouragement. I hope you have a good evening. Take care.